In today's video, we're back with some updated NHL trade rumors, including some updates on the Phil Kessel situation with the Pittsburgh Penguins, a potential trade between the Jets and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We also got some free agent rumors as well. We'll get into all the latest coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. We cover all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Today's video is loaded with all kinds of information on some potential trade rumors as well as free agent rumors. I highly suggest you want to watch this whole video to get all the info here today. So let's jump right into today's content. And I want to start with the hot topic right now in the NHL for potential trade rumors, and that's Phil Kessel and his situation with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, as we had reported a couple of days ago, there was a deal on the table between the Penguins and the Minnesota Wild, which would have sent Phil Kessel, defenseman Jack Johnson, over to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for forwards Jason Zucker and Victor Rask. Now, Phil Kessel does have a partial no-trade clause. How his contract works is that trade clause indicates that he has 8 teams that he will accept a trade to without getting any additional permission, so not required to waive. We don't know, obviously, who's on that 8-team list. I'd certainly be very curious to know. But as of right now, of course, that's not public information. But unfortunately, it looks as though Phil Kessel did veto the deal going to Minnesota. When the deal was first reported to be in public here, it was reported that he was kind of doing some research on Minnesota, their team, and kind of weighing out his options. But it was believed by NHL insiders that he was leaning towards not accepting that trade. And as of right now, we have no reason to believe he's going to. Nothing has changed as of yet. I guess anything is possible. They could certainly revisit that if Phil kind of changes his mind here. But as of right now, it looks as though Kessel's definitely not accepting that trade. Of course, that spawned a lot of other speculation of who might be on his no-trade list. Although it does seem inevitable that the Penguins will trade Kessel this summer. Many believe that Phil Kessel didn't have the greatest year off the ice with the Penguins, butting heads a lot with some of his teammates and coach Mike Sullivan. And it does look as though it's probably in the best interest for him to get a fresh start, the Penguins to move on and try to free up some cap space, maybe get a little bit younger in the process here as well. So I do think Jason Zucker would have been a terrific addition to the Penguins. Based on Kessel's, more experience and pedigree that he's shown to put up points on a regular basis. I do think, though, even with that Pittsburgh would have come out ahead in this trade longer term. But of course, Minnesota needs some more scoring. It's still a head scratcher to me why they want to trade Zucker, but it is another guy that seems inevitable that he likely is finding his way out of Minnesota this summer. Now, in regards to Phil Kessel, one team that many believe he would go to would be the Arizona Coyotes because of his relationship with his former assistant coach in Pittsburgh, Rick Tocchet. Of course, Tocchet's now the head coach in Arizona, and many believe that he would love to play for him yet again. Now, many have talked about this, including NHL insider Elliot Friedman, but many feel that there might not be a good deal there between the Penguins and the Coyotes to send Phil down to the Coyotes organization. However, taking another look at this, I can't help but wonder if a deal could be had between the Penguins and the Coyotes if the Coyotes included Alex Galchenyuk. Now, it was reported before he was traded to the Coyotes, when Montreal still had him on their roster, that the Penguins were showing interest in acquiring him back then. Now, of course, Galchenyuk had a decent year in Arizona, but wasn't as good as many had hoped for, mainly, again, due to injuries. But Galchenyuk is a player with not a lot of term left on his contract. He's certainly way younger than Kessel and still has a lot of upside that could be found here, especially playing with more elite offensive players, that the Penguins would be able to put him within their top 6. Now, if the deal had to include Jack Johnson like the Minnesota deal did, maybe they could send Jack Johnson and Phil Kessel down to the Coyotes in exchange for Alex Galchenyuk in another piece. Maybe another younger forward like a Christian Fischer, possibly a Christian Dvorak. I'm not sure if that would be somebody that the Coyotes would want to include. He is signed to a long-term deal and does have some potential upside for them longer term. So probably Fischer would be the more likely one, or maybe one of their defensemen as well to kind of offset it here. Either way, though, I do think that it's quite possible that the Coyotes and Penguins could find a deal here if the Coyotes were willing to include Galchenyuk. I can't say for sure that the Penguins still have the interest in him that they did before, but the interest was there previously, and it might be the key piece to include here to kind of find common ground and get a deal done. Of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and your opinions on the Phil Kessel situation down in the comments. So let me know what teams you think he would accept a trade to, and maybe give me some mock trades that we can discuss further in the comments here. Moving over to some actual signings here quickly, just to cover off a few quick items. We did see a couple of contracts get settled here in the last couple of days. The Montreal Canadiens have signed defenseman Brett Kulak to a 3-year deal extension worth $1.8 million per season. So Kulak fit pretty nicely with Montreal after being acquired by the Calgary Flames last summer. After coming over from the Flames, he certainly did fit there, and I can see the contract making good sense for them longer term. That left side of their decor is certainly an area that needs to have some focus. I don't think Kulak is an answer long term to play in the top four, but I can certainly see him being a third pair guy and playing a pretty decent role at that. So pretty good signing overall for Montreal. The Colorado Avalanche have extended goaltender Pavel Francouz for one more year at $950,000. Obviously, he came over from the Czech Republic, played with the Avalanche this past year, mostly in their American Hockey League affiliate. Obviously, they ran with Grubauer and Varlamov mostly at the NHL level this past year. But many believe that Varlamov will leave the team via free agency this summer, and they're signing Francouz hopefully to be the backup to Grubauer next year. But based on some reports, though, many believe that's not a foregone conclusion that Varlamov leaves. But I do expect, at the very least, he will make it to free agency, talk to other teams, see what's out there, and possibly consider a return to Colorado if they're willing to offer him something, a lower contract, maybe for more of a backup type of role. But either way, they got Francouz extended. I like this goaltender, and I do think he could be a great backup complement to Grubauer should Varlamov depart via free agency. The Winnipeg Jets have extended their backup goaltender as well, Laurent Brossoit, for one more year, $1.25 million. I do think he also fit in the Jets system nicely. Obviously, he didn't have the greatest time with the Oilers when he was in their organization, but after coming over and playing with Winnipeg last year, I do think he played relatively solid as a backup goaltender, and it's another good signing for them. They have many contracts to look after this year. The Edmonton Oilers have also signed left winger Joakim Nygaard, who's coming over from Sweden to play in North America next year. Nygaard's been playing in Sweden for the last number of years. Pretty solid looking forward by the looks of it. There's many teams interested in this forward. Came down to, I think, 2 or 3 teams here in the last little bit, including their rival, the Calgary Flames. Nygaard is certainly an interesting player who should fit somewhere in the top 9. The Oilers certainly need some wingers who can score, and it looks as though the short-term deal with Nygaard is pretty low risk and potential has some upside here. Might be a good fit with them longer term. Now, jumping back to some trade rumors, many believe the Vegas Golden Knights are going to be active this summer. They kind of have to be in a way to free up some cap space. They're really tight to the cap. There's really no room after giving Mark Stone that mega extension. Of course, they also signed Pacioretty and Stastny and all these other guys to longer-term deals, which ate up a lot of their cap space here. So many believe they have a few options. We've talked about some players before, but one other option they do have is they do have the contract of David Clarkson, who's has a possibility of being on LTIR here. He's not going to be playing anymore, obviously. So they could trade that contract. Obviously, they've taken that on earlier when they were first coming into the NHL to kind of get to the salary cap floor, but now that they're well beyond that, they need to get rid of it here and free up some space. So look to a team, maybe like an Ottawa or somebody who's going to have to spend some money to get to the cap floor, somebody who's got lots of space. They're going to have to add a sweetener, obviously, to that deal. Maybe they throw in some picks or prospects or something. But if another team can use that contract to help get to the floor slightly above and gain some picks or prospects in return, that should not be too difficult of a deal to do. There will be a little bit limited on teams they can talk to based on salary cap situations. But like for example, like I said, Ottawa, prime example there. They're going to have to spend to get to the floor. It's only short term. I believe it's only 1 year left on that contract. So it's not really any kind of longer term risk here. They can take that on for the year, get a little something extra in return for doing that, and move on and frees up some space for Vegas. Now, of course, they are also expected to continue shopping right-hand defenseman Colin Miller. He probably is another player that gets moved out. Trading the Clarkson contract alone is not going to give them enough flexibility, but it certainly will go a long ways to helping for sure. Colin Miller is a player, though, that is expected to be moved. His ice time has certainly dropped near the end of the year into the playoffs. He even missed sometimes a healthy scratch, and Miller kind of fell out of favor here with the coaching staff, and some other defensemen kind of picked up the slack on his playing time. He certainly has a great shot, can be great on a power play. We've talked a few other times before about Miller being traded, but many still believe that he, along with the Clarkson contract, both being moved, should hopefully free up enough space to kind of satisfy their situation that they may not have to move any forwards. If they do have to go down that road, many believe some guys like a Cody Eakin, for example, could be a guy that's moved out to free up more space, but those two things alone should kind of get Vegas settled down so they don't have to do too many other moves here. Coming over quickly to talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. Of course, they had a magical run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. There was some uncertainty around GM Don Waddell if he'd be back in this same role at least for next year. Many believe that he might just do the GM job for one season. There was some interviews with other people last offseason, but ultimately where he was already in the organization, already had experience. Tom Dundon ultimately offered the position to him. He agreed to do it, but many wasn't sure if he'd stick around in that capacity long term. However, he has come out publicly and acknowledged that he is going to continue as GM, that him and the owner, Tom Dundon, are kind of in the process of ironing out the terms and conditions of his contract, but that he will be staying in that role. Of course, another big question mark is whether or not Justin Williams returns. He could be contemplating retirement at his age. He's played a lot of games in the NHL for a long time, and he apparently is not sure yet if he will return. But if he does, I would think the Carolina Hurricanes will do their best to get him under contract for probably looking at a one-year deal. I would think that he probably won't want to commit too long. But I can see those two hooking up again and him staying in Carolina for another season if he decides he wants to continue playing. Now, one trade rumor with the Hurricanes here as well. They are expected to move a defenseman. Now, we talked a lot about the Hurricanes throughout the year about moving a defenseman, and it never happened. Then they go through this playoff run where a lot of them really secured their spots here and really showed their worth. Jacob Slavin was an absolute beast. He's certainly an untouchable in that blue line for sure. But many believe Justin Falk could be moved. That's still a possibility. But one thing I want to circle back on here is all the Brett Pesce rumors we saw earlier in the year. There was a lot of talk about Pesce going to Toronto for William Nylander and different trades. But Pesce was always the guy that many other teams were after. But apparently earlier in the season, Pesce was not happy with his playing time. So I can't help but wonder if maybe some information out of the Hurricane side might have been leaked to kind of get some interest going in the blue liner should things not change. But as the season went on, Rod Brind'Amour started playing him more. His ice time went up, and he's certainly much happier now and much less likely to get traded. I do think it's a good chance youngster Hayden Fleury gets moved. He needs to be able to play and is having a hard time getting a spot there in the Hurricanes. They have so many defensemen. So you combine Fleury and veteran Justin Falk, they're the most likely guys to get moved, but I do expect them to make those moves and to add some scoring forwards, or at least attempt to, through those trades if possible. Now, one other player who could be finding himself in a new uniform next year is St. Louis Blues goaltender Jake Allen. Jordan Binnington's come along, basically stolen his number one job as a starting goaltender since January. Jake Allen's been relegated to being the backup, and considering that he's making over $4 million and still has some term left on his contract, you can't help but wonder if the Blues might not want to have that expensive of a backup moving forward. Of course, Jordan Binnington needs a new contract, and it's certainly going to be very curious to see how that's handled. I mean, this is his first real year having a lot of success at the NHL level and playing at the NHL, but he's had so much success going all the way to the finals. It's been such a huge part of that you can't help but wonder how much he's going to be looking for and what kind of term they might offer. However, I think it's pretty fair to say he's probably going to make as much or more than Jake Allen is right now based on his performance of getting them to the finals, especially if they win the Stanley Cup. Therefore, I don't imagine the Blues are going to want to have that much money tied up in their goaltending. So there's lots of teams looking for goaltenders. Definitely some Canadian teams that will be in the mix for Jake's services should they decide to move him along. Like I mentioned with the Oilers, for example, they need a 1A, 1B situation for Koskinen. He might be a situation. So Jake might be in a position where that might work for him. Some of his best hockey he played when he was doing the 1A, 1B situation with Brian Elliott in the past. Having Jake be that dual 1A, 1B goalie might be a great situation for him there. Same thing with the Calgary Flames. It's not quite sure yet if Mike Smith's going to return. He's a free agent. Of course, David Riddick's going to need some help. So they could do a 1A, 1B situation there with Riddick and Allen. That's a possibility too. You have to look to Ottawa even. I mean, obviously, Anders Nilsson's a free agent. Probably not coming back. You get Craig Anderson, who's getting older. They do have some pretty decent goalie prospects in their systems, but they're going to be a few years away from having any chance of being a starter. Probably 1 or 2 years away from being a solid backup. So he could fit there as well for the next couple of years and kind of platoon with Craig Anderson. That's another possibility. And they're not the only ones. There's others as well. So I think there's lots of teams out there that likely would show interest in him who could afford to take on that contract for the next few years. And then obviously we'll see what happens if he can get his career resurrected or if he'll be kind of relegated to being a backup for the remainder of his time in the NHL. Hard to say, but he's a good goalie, but he's been inconsistent and needs to find his game. And he might have an opportunity to do that in a New Jersey next year. Now, of course, this leads us to the Winnipeg Jets and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and could they have a perfect match made if they were to take a look at maybe moving Nazem Kadri for Jacob Trouba? I don't have any information to suggest right now that these two teams are discussing this trade. This is just an opinion on mine. I've seen some other reports suggesting this deal as well, and you know what? It makes a lot of sense. The Jets have really struggled to find a solid, consistent number 2 center iceman. They've had trades at the last 2 trade deadlines, giving up first-round picks to acquire guys like Stastny and then Hayes, only to see them depart via free agency. Kadri's got the right type of contract that fits in their salary cap needs. It's going to certainly be less money than what Jacob Trouba is going to be earning. From the Leafs standpoint, that might be hard to do just because of the salary cap situation. They have their own things to worry about here. They might have to find ways to make that happen from that perspective, maybe include something else going to Winnipeg or have some other deals here. The Jets and Leafs are both in a similar salary cap situation where they have lots of players that need contracts and they don't have enough space to satisfy them all. So it might be a tricky deal to do, but you have to agree here, most people I think would, that those two pieces would satisfy and complement each other's teams so well. The Leafs really need a top right-handed shot defenseman who can play solid top 4 minutes, even top 2 minutes. Which Trouba can, I think, is fully capable of. He's a 50-point defenseman. Certainly can play that role, play big minutes, and be effective on both ends of the ice. You got Kadri, who's that number 2 center who can score 30 goals. He's got lots of grit. He can certainly add a lot of value to that Jets lineup as well. Hopefully he could be a guy who could mesh with a guy like a Patrick Laine, for example, and really get him going. But both these teams are likely going to be very active, moving some key pieces because they just can't afford to keep everybody. But it would certainly be an interesting move to see them two hook up and satisfy each other's needs by working out a Kadri for Trouba type of deal. Now, it might not be a one-for-one deal. There might be some other pieces involved, but there are some reports out there that I do agree with that this would be a great move for both teams. So, of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions on a potential Jets and Leafs deal getting hooked up here, sending Kadri to the Jets in exchange for right-handed shot defenseman Jacob Trouba. Be all kinds of activity over the next few weeks, whether it be actual signings, trades, or tons of rumors going around as we approach the draft, where we should see lots of trade activity, hopefully, as well as free agency and all kinds of guys changing uniforms here and shaking things up for next year as all these other teams try to move forward and compete for the Stanley Cup here next season. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.